The morning calm shattered with the thunder of helicopter blades cutting through the sky. Our quiet street was never meant for chaos, yet in that moment it looked like the set of a Hollywood film. Neighbors spilled out of their homes, slippers slapping the pavement, phones raised high to record whatever madness was unfolding. Coffee mugs trembled in their hands as they looked up. But the loudest sound wasn't the helicopter. It was her scream. Karen. Our self-appointed HOA queen, storming out in her silk bathrobe, eyes wide with panic. Her precious Lexus, her pride, her crown, her weapon, was wrapped in heavy chains, lifting from the ground, swaying helplessly as sunlight bounced off the windshield. The crowd gasped, some laughed, others cheered. My driveway was finally clear, but this wasn't just about a car. This was about power, humiliation, and what happens when arrogance takes flight. Now, before I tell you how we got here, I'll ask you the same thing I ask all my neighbors. Have you ever lived under an HOA? If you have, you know the feeling, like living in a circus. Only here the neighbors are the clowns, and leading this twisted parade, Karen. President of the HOA, self-proclaimed savior of the subdivision, clipboard clutched like a scepter. To her, rules weren't guidelines, they were weapons, and she wielded them with delight. I'd been in Maplerist for over 15 years, bought my home when the neighborhood was simple. Kids on bikes, weekend barbecues, people minding their own business. But that all changed the day Karen arrived. It was like a storm moving in. The air felt heavier. She strutted down sidewalks like she owned the asphalt. She barked at kids to keep off her grass. She measured hedges with a ruler. And when she wasn't writing violation slips, she was smiling that smug smile that told you she enjoyed every ounce of control. We clashed before. She hated my roses, said they were untamed, as though flowers were wild lions that needed a cage. I reminded her those roses had been planted long before the HOA even existed. Her answer was always the same. Rules are rules. Except rules never seemed to apply to her. That truth hit me hard on a Tuesday morning. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready for another quiet day, and then I froze. A gleaming white Lexus SUV sat sprawled across my driveway, not parked on the street, not even crooked at the curb. No, Karen had nosed it in sideways, blocking both my garage doors with surgical precision. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe she lost control, but then I saw it. The note. Tucked under my windshield wiper, written in bold, smug block letters. Perhaps this will remind you that no one is above HOA compliance. Trim the roses or next time I'll have your car booted. HOA President Karen. I almost spit my coffee across the hood. She had parked her car in my driveway to punish me for not trimming flowers. Flowers. By mid-morning, the whole cul-de-sac had gathered. Some pretended they were out walking their dogs. Others leaned against mailboxes, phones angled like sports reporters waiting for the first punch. A couple of teens perched on their bikes, whispering like announcers. He's not gonna let this slide. I stepped outside, calm as stone, coffee still in hand. Karen, I called loud enough for every phone camera to hear, would you mind moving your tank off my driveway? Her front door slammed open. Out she came, sunglasses perched on her nose, hair sprayed into a helmet, clipboard gripped like a gavel. She didn't walk, she marched. Excuse me, she snapped. This is a lawful immobilization of property. You've repeatedly refused to comply with HOA standards. Until you do, your access is revoked. I blinked. Revoked, Karen. This is my garage, my property. She smirked. You signed the covenant when you moved in. The HOA has the right to enforce compliance. The neighbors murmured. Some bit their lips, fighting laughter. Others shook their heads. But Karen, she wasn't joking. She actually believed she was judge, jury, and sheriff of Maplerist. I set my coffee cup gently on the hood of her Lexus. Her gasp was sharp enough to break glass. Move it, I said quietly, or I'll have it towed. Her lips curled into a villain's smile. Go ahead. I already called the towing company. They won't touch my car. They're under contract. Then she turned on her heel and strutted back inside, leaving her SUV sprawled like a throne in the middle of my property. The neighbors buzzed. He's done for, one whispered. Another muttered, she's gone too far. Phones kept rolling. Karen thought she'd won. But as I stared at her shiny blockade reflecting the morning sun, something stirred inside me. This wasn't just about roses. This was about being humiliated in front of my own neighborhood, punished like a child who refused to clean his room. The thing about me is, I don't break easily. And when I do, I don't just break, I build plans, schemes, blueprints for poetic justice. That evening, as her Lexus sat smugly in front of my garage, I realized something. She thought she had power, but power's just a game, and she had no idea she was playing with the wrong man. Because while she paraded around like a queen, I was already sketching the plan that would take her Lexus and her pride into the sky. The sun rose again, and Karen's Lexus still sat there, parked like a monument, gleaming as if it owned the block. Every time I stepped outside, its polished chrome mocked me. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a message. Her blockade screamed across the cul-de-sac, "I own you." And the neighbors, they ate it up. Kids circled on bikes, pointing and laughing. Joggers slowed to snap photos. Even old Mr. Henderson from down the street dragged out a lawn chair, lemonade in hand, narrating the scene like it was Sunday football. Karen loved it. She strutted across her yard in a pink tracksuit and oversized sun hat, waving to neighbors like she was hosting a parade. "That's what happens when you don't follow the rules," she'd say loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm just maintaining order." Order, that word twisted in my head like a splinter. Her order meant chaos dressed up with a clipboard. She had turned my driveway into her stage, her Lexus into a throne, and me into the villain of her neighborhood fable. On the third morning, I found her holding court in her driveway, clipboard in hand, lecturing three poor souls about their recycling bins not being the right shade of blue. And all the while, her Lexus sprawled across my garage like a guard dog. I walked over calm but sharp. "Morning, Karen. Just curious, how long are you planning to run this little blockade festival?" She didn't even look at me. "Until compliance is achieved," she said, scribbling notes like she was writing scripture. "Compliance," I echoed, my voice dripping sarcasm. "Karen, these are roses, not hazardous waste." She lowered her sunglasses slowly, theatrically, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Rules are rules. Until you cut them to regulation height, you'll find your access restricted." The neighbors leaned in closer, phones tilted up. They weren't watching a dispute anymore, they were watching a show. I swear I heard the ping of a live stream notification as cameras zoomed in on her smirk. I couldn't help it, I laughed, not a polite chuckle, a full booming laugh that rolled down the cul-de-sac. "You're really proud of yourself, huh?" Her nose wrinkled. "Someone has to maintain standards or this place will look like," she waved vaguely at my immaculate lawn. "Like this." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew my yard was pristine, one of the best on the block. But that didn't matter to her. She wasn't fighting roses, she was fighting me. And that's when I realized something. She needed an audience. She thrived on the humiliation, on the whispers, on the spectacle. To her, this wasn't about rules, it was about power. And the bigger her stage got, the harder she'd fall when the curtain closed. That night, I watched from my porch as she patted the hood of her Lexus like it was a faithful pet. "Good work today," she murmured, loud enough for me to hear. Then she strutted back inside, leaving her SUV as a shining blockade across my freedom. I sipped my bourbon and smiled. The higher she climbed, the harder she would fall. The next morning, I called the police, not because I expected help, but because I wanted the comedy. The officer chuckled on the line. "Sorry, sir, sounds like a civil matter. We can't tow without a violation of city code." Civil matter, HOA code for you're on your own. Fine, I checked towing companies, but Karen had them in her pocket. She'd signed contracts months earlier. None of them would dare touch her Lexus, even if I paid triple. That's when it hit me. She thought she was untouchable, that her fortress of rules and contracts would protect her forever. But I've never been much of a rule follower. And when the rule book is rigged, the only way forward is to change the game. By day 5, gossip was buzzing through the neighborhood like static. People whispered about how I hadn't backed down, about how Karen was pushing harder than ever. Even neighbors who hated my roses started rooting for me. One afternoon, old Mr. Jenkins shuffled up while I checked the mail. He leaned in, his voice low but eyes sparkling. Son, I've lived here 30 years. Nobody ever stood up to that woman and survived, but I've got a feeling, he winked. You might be the one. I smiled. Don't worry, Mr. Jenkins, I've got a plan. And oh, did I? Because the truth was, I had connections Karen didn't know about. Friends who didn't just work on the ground, but in the sky. All I had to do was bide my time, let her dig herself deeper, and wait for the perfect moment to pull the rug out. So I let her bask. I let her wave her sun hat like a queen to her audience. I let her believe she had won. And every night, bourbon glass in hand, I stared at that Lexus gleaming in my driveway and smiled. Because soon, very soon, her throne would fly. There's a saying I've always believed in: never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. And Karen, she loved the mud. But unlike most in Maplerist, I wasn't afraid of dirt. I'd built my life out of it, literally. I was a small-time contractor. Dump trucks, cranes, forklifts, the heavy machines that move the world. Those were my tools, and more importantly, I had friends who owed me favors. So while Karen paraded her Lexus like a trophy, I sat on my porch, bourbon glass sweating in the heat, and started sketching a plan. Not a petty act, not vandalism. No, I wanted something poetic, something unforgettable. First thought, hire a tow truck from out of state. But Karen had that covered. She had towing contracts tighter than Fort Knox, not worth the gamble. Second thought, slash her tires. Tempting, very tempting, but too obvious, too small. I didn't want to stoop to her level. I wanted to raise the stakes. Literally. I was flipping through old contacts on my phone when I saw a name I hadn't thought of in years. Rodney Rotor Alvarez. An old buddy from my contracting days who now ran a heavy-lift helicopter service. The kind of choppers that could pick up shipping containers like Lego bricks. And just like that, the vision crystallized. Karen wanted to block my driveway? Fine. I'd make sure the whole neighborhood watched as her precious Lexus rose into the air like a dangling puppet, swaying above the cul-de-sac. But I wasn't stupid. This couldn't just be a stunt. It had to be airtight, legally speaking. Karen was the queen of lawsuits, and I wasn't giving her ammunition. So I dug HOA bylaws, city ordinances, parking laws, hours of reading fine print until my eyes burned. And then there it was. Parking across someone's driveway wasn't just rude, it was illegal trespassing. And trespassing property, well, it can be removed by reasonable means. Was airlifting a Lexus by helicopter reasonable? Maybe not in most neighborhoods, but Maplerist had never met me. Still, I wanted backup, so I grabbed a beer with an old lawyer friend. I laid it out casually without names. Say someone's car is blocking your garage. You've got photos, witnesses. Could you remove it yourself? He smirked, took a sip. If it's trespass, technically, yeah, just don't drop it on a freeway. I raised an eyebrow. What about a lawn? He chuckled. If you've got permission, then it's your circus. That word stuck with me, permission. See, Karen didn't act alone. Her power didn't just come from her clipboard. She had allies, board members, sure, but her biggest enabler was the mayor. Douglas Whitfield, a slick politician with a golf addiction and a smile that could sell snake oil. Karen cut checks for his campaign. In return, he turned a blind eye to her little empire of fines and threats. So we're better to deliver her Lexus than his perfectly manicured front lawn. The one trimmed to golf course standards. The one he bragged about at every fundraiser. It was poetic symmetry. Her weapon of control dropped right at the feet of the man who let her rule unchecked. The idea made my heart race. Cameras flashing, neighbors cheering, Karen screaming. The mayor's brunch party ruined in one spectacular moment. I picked up the phone, dialed Rodney. Hey, Rotor, I said, using the nickname from back in the day. His laugh boomed through the line. Well, if it isn't trouble, what do you need? I hesitated for the smallest second, then I said it. I need something moved. What kind of something? A car. Silence, then he laughed again. A car? Man, my birds haul steel beams, not Toyotas. It's not a Toyota, I replied. It's a Lexus parked illegally across my garage. That shut him up. Illegal. Yep, got photos, got witnesses, everything. Question is, can you lift it without scratching the paint? I swear I heard him grin. Send me the address, I'll make it happen. We picked Saturday morning. Early enough the whole neighborhood would be awake. Late enough people would still be in robes and slippers, prime audience conditions. I didn't advertise it, but I dropped hints. Might want your phone ready Saturday, I told Jenkins. His eyes lit up like Christmas lights. Meanwhile, I played it cool with Karen. Every time I saw her, I acted defeated, resigned. She caught me one afternoon staring at her Lexus. Getting used to the view, she smirked. I shrugged. Guess so, you've got me beat, Karen. She beamed like a queen accepting tribute. That's what happens when you fight the HOA. Oh, Karen, if only you knew. That night I sat at my kitchen table, maps and photos spread out, adrenaline buzzing through me. Rodney had his rigging gear ready, chains, hooks, straps, all industrial grade. We run the numbers, rehearsed the lift on paper. It was a foolproof. By Saturday morning, Maplerist was going to witness something so outrageous, so unforgettable they'd whisper about it for years. And when it was over, Karen would finally understand. You don't start a war with a man who knows how to fly. The morning felt electric, the kind of hush that sits right before a thunderclap. People stood on porches like spectators at a matinee, even the birds seemed to pause. I felt it in my chest, that low, steady drumbeat of something about to break. This wasn't a fight about roses anymore. It was the moment all the whispering nights had led to, the first thump of rotors cutting the sky. I stepped onto my porch with my coffee, trying to look ordinary, but my hands were steady and my heart was a live wire. Across the street, Karen was already out, soaking up the audience like sunlight. Pink tracksuit, oversized sun hat, clipboard glinting. She was the queen in full regalia, confident, vindicated. Her Lexus still sat like a shrine across my driveway, polished and smug. The sight of it would have made most men simmer. It made me calculate. Then the first distant thump rolled over the rooftops, soft at first like a warning, heads tilted, phones lifted, conversations cut off mid-sentence. The sound swelled, not the emergency siren I'd half feared, but a deliberate, powerful presence. A heavy-lift chopper cresting the tree line, rotors chopping the morning air into a frenzy. Wind hit the block like a fist. Paper flew. Hangers clattered from laundry lines. Coffee steamed and then disappeared, toppled by gusts. Karen frowned. Confusion flickered over her lipstick-bright face. "What on earth?" she shrieked, louder than the blades, the way only a woman used to being obeyed can screech when control slips. She shaded her eyes, squinted upwards, and stepped forward like a woman disoriented on a stage she'd once mastered. People craned their necks, phones went wild. The chopper hovered above like an impossible bird. And then, as if choreographed by something far older than neighborhood grudges, Rodney's crew rappelled down with industrial efficiency. They moved with the calm of men who'd spent decades corralling chaos, not because they were cruel, but because their job demanded precision. Heavy-duty chains glinted, hooks flashed, straps looped around tires with practiced speed. It all looked inevitable and ridiculous at once. Neighbors cried out, kids squealed. Jenkins bellowed something that sounded like laughter. Karen's composure dissolved into a raw, panicked howl that cut right through the rotor wash. "Stop! Stop! That's my car!" She charged forward, slippers slapping the asphalt, arms flailing like a puppeteer trying to pull strings gone slack. Rodney's foreman didn't flinch. They'd checked the angles, the clearances, the permits that could be argued after the fact if they had to. Chains tightened. A final thumbs up. The Lexus lifted, slowly at first, then with the inevitability of a tide. The car hung 10 feet above asphalt, sun-catching chrome, reflecting every stunned face below like a disco ball of consequence. There's a distinct second when a plan goes from idea to reality, when you stop rehearsing in your head and hear the metal singing in the air. I felt that second like a sharp, delicious intake of breath. It was everything. The years of humiliation, the late-night plans, the jokes, the small acts of kindness from neighbors who'd always been too afraid to speak. It was dignity stiffening into action. Karen's scream turned up an octave, changing from rage to something that sounded dangerously like fear. She stomped, pleaded, promised lawsuits, the kind of grand, cinematic promises that crumble under public scrutiny. "You'll pay for this," she shrieked at me through the downdraft. "You'll be sorry. Her words were swallowed by the blade's thunder. Now, for the first time in years, she had an audience that refused to be bullied into silence. Phones recorded from every angle. The footage would be merciless, repeating her meltdown frame by frame. But in that immediate tidal wave of spectacle, something else unfolded, a tiny, quiet healing. Faces that had once turned away now turned to me, then to each other, and they were smiling with relief. Not joy at someone's misfortune. Relief at the idea that the neighborhood might be free of fear. As the helicopter climbed, the Lexus swung like a pendant, the chains humming a low metallic lullaby. People chased shadows, lifting their gazes like worshippers watching an idol float away. I sipped cold coffee, my robe flapping at my knees, and felt a strange blend of satisfaction and sorrow. Justice isn't always clean. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it leaves dents in lawns, in reputations, in people. But I'd thought about the aftermath. I'd thought about the mayor and his manicured lawn, the man whose silence had become complicity. The lift wasn't vengeance as much as it was truth with a billboard on it. Where power is unchecked, spectacle can be the equalizer. This was a message to every clipboard tyrant. You can't build kingdoms out of other people's fear and expect them to remain indebted forever. The helicopter banked toward the route we'd plotted, a course threaded through quiet back roads and civic blindness. Karen stumbled after it, dragging her bathrobe like a flag of surrender, but she still screamed about law and order. Her voice became a kind of pleading that even the most loyal of her followers couldn't stomach. The crowd's laughter turned sharp in the air, a chorus that felt less like cruelty and more like the release of a pressure valve that had long been held closed. Even now, as the chopper carried her Lexus into the distance, my mind worked the edges. The spectacle was the first act. The reveal, the humiliation in front of the mayor, the legal theater that would follow, that was Act 2. I'd orchestrated a crescendo, but the moral chord I wanted to strike had little to do with a car or a lawn. It had everything to do with showing people that silence is where bullies feed and courage, even ridiculous, noisy courage, starves them. There's a small, trembling truth to revenge. It rarely tastes how you expect. It's sweeter when it restores something that was lost, dignity, balance, the right to live in your own driveway. As the helicopter receded and the neighborhood buzzed like a hive stirred, I felt those pieces clicking back into place. But the plan wasn't finished. The car's destination would change the game, and the mayor's brunch was still in motion. The real test wasn't in the lift alone. It was what landed next, and how the town would decide to judge two people who'd thought they owned everyone else's silence. And somewhere between the roar and the retreating blades, I wondered if Karen, who had built herself on other people's quiet, could survive the sound of her own unraveling. The helicopter cut a clean line through the sky, and with every beat of those blades, my chest kept time. People followed the dot until it grew into something undeniable. A white Lexus swinging beneath a machine that belonged in movie credits, not neighborhood gossip. It felt like watching a slow-motion verdict being delivered. Everyone who had ever been cowed by clipboard threats now watched, mouths open, as the pages of that story turned. Word traveled faster than the chopper. Social feeds lit up. Helicopter over Maine, car dangling. One clip looped and looped. Another showed my porch, my robe, my coffee, me, the man who'd finally said enough. I felt strange watching myself from a dozen angles, strange and oddly calm. This wasn't just spectacle, it was exposure. And exposure is a kind of medicine. The mayor's estate came into view like a postcard of privilege. A long, gated drive, topiaries trimmed like soldiers, fountains that never sputtered. On the lawn, the mayor hosted his brunch in full vineyard regalia, people in linen, laughter tuned to polite decibels, clinking silver, cigarettes of social currency. They weren't the sort to look up from their napkins, or at least that's what I'd thought. Then the shadow fell. A hush slammed the party like a hand. Conversation nodded into confusion. Faces tilted. Champagne paused halfway to lips. For a heartbeat, there was disbelief that something so absurd could become so real so fast. And then the helicopter descended, the Lexus swinging like a pendulum of accountability, chrome flashing like a gaudy sermon. When it landed, with a dull, disgusted thud that ate the string quartet's last note, the sound was a punctuation mark. Grass flattened. Napkins flew. A woman screamed as a hedgehog of champagne toppled into her lap. The mayor's face went a color no flattering camera angle could hide. He stumbled forward, comb over in rebellion, eyes wide in a way only men who have built reputations on quiet complicity know. It was glorious and awkward, and somehow absolutely just. People scattered like startled birds. Phones whipped out with the fervor of medieval scribes. The Lexus sat there, ridiculous and regal, an unwanted monument on manicured turf. The mayor's guests gaped. The social elite who'd once praised Karen's devotion to standards now gawked at the physical embodiment of that devotion, stranded like a lesson with four wheels. Karen's wail ricocheted across the estate and onto every feed. "They stole my car, they humiliated me." Her voice had the thin, desperate cadence of someone who discovered the world didn't run on her fear anymore. She staggered, mascara streaking like war paint gone wrong. The mayor's gasp was not sympathy. It was calculation. He'd built his alliances carefully. Now one of his favored players had become a liability on his lawn. Reporters arrived like clockwork, cameras rolling, voices professional but twitchy with the scent of spectacle. "Mayor Whitfield, can you comment?" they asked, voices polished to neutrality. He opened his mouth and the rehearsed platitudes fumbled into something raw. "This was an outrageous act," he said, and you could hear the edge of panic. "We are investigating." But the clip that hit the feeds, the one that would shape the next week, showed him clutching at his collar as if to tamp down embarrassment. Political armor dense, and the sound is ugly. Meanwhile, in my cul-de-sac, the mood had shifted from giddy to vindicated. People who'd lived with the quiet tyranny of a clipboard now laughed out loud, the kind of laughter that loosens something inside you. Mrs. Patel waved from her porch like she'd found her voice. Teenagers chanted in a way that felt like a neighborhood anthem. Jenkins tipped his hat and said, "Boy, you knocked the king off his horse." He didn't mean the mayor. He meant something larger, an ecosystem of fear. In the days that followed, the town felt like the day after a storm. News trucks dotted the mayor's lawn like weeds, and every anchor wanted a line that would trend. Karen called it theft, a criminal conspiracy, and demanded charges. The city law department opened inquiries. The mayor demanded apologies. The HOA scrambled through bylaws like cornered rodents. And the thing I watched with a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease was how quickly the puppet strings pulled taut. People who'd hidden behind committee minutes now had to attach their names to decisions. It's surprising how fast supporters look for exits when the music stops. Karen, for all her bluster, cracked first. The board convened an emergency meeting where she entered with the same fragile dignity as a ship that's taken on water. Voices that used to hush for her now spoke freely. A woman who had once cowered under Karen's glare stood up and said the words that rippled through the room. "You parked across his driveway. That's illegal." It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. The board voted to strip her of the presidency. The gavel fell like a small, private thunderclap. For years, she'd been the sound of control. Suddenly, she was silence with shaky breath. There was fallout beyond resignations. The mayor filed complaints: trespass, public nuisance, damages to his pristine lawn. Headlines shrugged between scandal and satire. Online, the memes were merciless. Mayor's lawn Lexus trended with that peculiar blend of schadenfreude and civic catharsis. I sat on my porch and watched the wave of justice turn into a tidal legal scramble. It was ugly in places. It was necessary in others. And yet, as much as the town rejoiced, a small, stubborn voice in me whispered caution. Victory is sharp. It cuts both ways. I'd broken a silence that had allowed cruelty to chew up neighbors for years. But in breaking it, I'd also shoved a spectacle into the world, loud, public, and irreversible. There's a lesson in that. Power built on fear collapses when people choose the discomfort of courage over the ease of silence. Yet courage isn't always noble. Sometimes it's messy and loud. Sometimes it leaves dents in lawns and bruises on egos. But sometimes that's what it takes to open a window in a closed room. When the dust settled and the mayor's lawyers took inventory of flattened turf and social capital, the town began to breathe differently. Children played on streets that felt less watched. Neighbors smiled without checking over their shoulder. I trimmed my roses when I wanted, not when someone with a clipboard demanded it. The Lexus became an artifact, a story told in bites at barbecues, in laughter, and in the occasional quiet shrug. Karen left not in defeat alone, but in exile. She sold the house. She sold the Lexus. The move-out truck pulled away one afternoon to a chorus that sounded remarkably like relief. And as I watched the taillights fade, I felt something settle into place, not triumph as a shout, but a quieter thing: balance. Yet the show had more scenes to play. Legal notices and angry op-eds were only the beginning. I knew the real reckoning would be in the weeks to come, in committees and courtrooms, in the slow, honest work of rebuilding trust. For now, though, as evening softened over the cul-de-sac and kids rode bikes past my roses, I allowed myself one small, private smile. Taken back a little of what had been stolen, our peace, our porch conversations, the feeling that our homes were truly ours. And somewhere beneath that satisfied grin was the awareness that justice had a cost. It was a cost I'd been willing to pay. The neighborhood felt lighter, like someone had opened a window after years of stale air. But the silence that followed Karen's downfall wasn't peace. It was the uneasy quiet before the aftershocks. Because people like Karen don't just vanish. They claw, they scheme. And when the spotlight fades, they scramble for another stage. By Monday night, she tried to seize one. She marched into the HOA's emergency meeting like nothing had changed, hair lacquered into a helmet, clipboard tucked under her arm like a general's saber. She barked about restoring order, about chaos taking root if she didn't remain in charge. She even jabbed her pen in my direction, voice trembling with rage. That man staged an act of domestic terrorism against this community, against our mayor. But the room wasn't hers anymore. For years, her glare could quiet a room. Now her words just hung in the air, brittle and desperate. Board members shifted in their seats, some staring at their shoes, others daring to meet her eyes. And then, in a moment that felt like history shifting, Mrs. Caldwell, the same woman Karen once fined for painting her mailbox the wrong shade of beige, spoke. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Karen, you parked your car across his driveway. That's illegal. You brought this on yourself." The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was agreement. The board didn't clap. They didn't defend her. They voted that night to strip her of the presidency. Her clipboard shook in her hands as the gavel fell, and for the first time, she wasn't the queen of Maplerist. She was just another neighbor, exposed and trembling. By Tuesday morning, the fallout spread like wildfire. The mayor, furious about his brunch disaster, filed charges against Karen: trespassing, nuisance, property damage. He fined her thousands for his ruined lawn and threatened further legal action. Suddenly, the woman who once ruled with threats now stood at the mercy of the very system she abused. Neighbors saw it too. People who once cowered when she walked past now whispered openly, laughed openly. Kids on bikes rode circles in the street chanting, "Mayor's Lawn Lexus," like it was a summer anthem. Even Jenkins, usually quiet, shook his head with a grin. Never thought I'd see it. Karen dethroned by a helicopter. I should have felt pure satisfaction. And yes, I won't lie, part of me did. Watching her empire collapse piece by piece was the kind of justice most people only dream of. But as I sat on my porch, bourbon in hand, I realized it wasn't about humiliating Karen. Not really. It was about balance, about showing the neighborhood that bullies don't get the final word. That silence isn't the same as surrender. Because here's the truth. Karen thrived because we let her. For years, people muttered under their breath, paid the fines, trimmed the hedges she measured, and called it easier than fighting. That silence gave her power, but power built on fear, it's fragile. The second someone shines a light, it crumbles. That's what the helicopter really was. Not just revenge, not just theater. It was a spotlight, a way to show everyone that the rules she weaponized didn't make her untouchable, that she could be held accountable in a way no fine or committee vote ever could. The days that followed were surreal. News crews camped out near the mayor's estate. Reporters replayed the footage on a loop, narrating it like it was a national scandal. Karen tried to spin the story. She called it a coordinated attack and claimed she was the victim, but the world didn't buy it. Online, the comments poured in by the thousands. HOA Karen finally got what she deserved. Mayor's Lawn Lexus is the greatest story of 2025. And the board, they wanted nothing to do with her anymore. She'd been their shield, their voice, their hammer. Now she was dead weight. Without Karen, they scrambled to rebuild credibility. Some even came to me privately, apologizing for letting her run unchecked. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Her downfall spoke louder than anything I could say. At night, I'd sit on my porch and watch the neighborhood breathe differently. Parents lingered outside with their kids. Teenagers lounged on curbs without worrying about clipboard inspections. For the first time in years, Maplerist didn't feel like a stage Karen controlled. It felt like a neighborhood again. Still, every victory has a cost. Karen's anger didn't vanish, it boiled beneath the surface. I'd catch glimpses of her in the days before she packed up, her face pale, eyes darting like a cornered animal. She muttered about unfair treatment, about conspiracies. She never once apologized. She never admitted she was wrong, and maybe she never would. But that wasn't the point. The point was that the neighborhood had seen behind the curtain. They'd seen that Karen's power wasn't real, it was borrowed, built on silence and intimidation. And once silence broke, there was nothing left. The night before the moving truck arrived, Jenkins joined me on the porch. We shared a drink, watching the cul-de-sac glow under the streetlights. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You know," he said, "sometimes fire fights fire, but this was fire fighting arrogance, and boy, arrogance burns fast." I raised my glass. Sometimes you've got to fight altitude with altitude. We laughed, clinking glasses under the quiet sky, and for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. But deep down, I knew one truth. Karen was gone, yes. But the lesson she left behind, the way bullies rise when good people stay quiet, would never leave me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. The morning Karen's moving truck rumbled into the cul-de-sac, the air felt different, like a storm cloud finally breaking apart after years of hovering. For so long, her presence had been the weather here. Gray skies, tense winds, sudden downpours of fines and threats. But now the neighborhood hummed with a cautious kind of joy. I stood by my roses, pruning shears in hand, when Jenkins ambled up beside me. His grin was wide, his eyes bright. "Well, son," he said, "never thought I'd live to see it. Karen Whitmore driven out not by lawyers or ballots, but by her own arrogance." He shook his head. "Legendary." Neighbors gathered like they were watching a parade, only this one didn't have floats. Just cardboard boxes, overstuffed bags, and a single battered Lexus parked at the curb. The same car that had once been her throne, her weapon, her crown. Now, stripped of its shine, it looked more like an anchor, dragging her pride behind it. The kids circled on bikes, chanting in sing-song voices, "Mayor's Lawn Lexus," over and over until the words felt like a hymn. Parents didn't hush them. Some even smiled, a guilty kind of smile that said they'd waited years to hear the sound. Karen tried to ignore it. She stomped in and out of her house, arms full of boxes, her face pale and hard, but every step looked heavier than the last. She refused to look at anyone, refused to acknowledge the eyes that had once dropped at her glare but now met her with boldness. She muttered to herself, low and sharp, like a woman holding on to the last threads of dignity. But dignity stitched from denial unravels quickly. The strangest thing, I didn't feel triumph watching her, not the way I expected. Yes, there was satisfaction in seeing justice. But as she loaded the last of her things, what I felt most was relief. Relief for the neighborhood, for the silence that would follow. Relief for the children who would grow up without being measured by the color of their recycling bins. By evening, the truck pulled away. Slowly, awkwardly, the neighbors lifted their hands. They weren't waving goodbye. They were waving away the storm. Watching the taillights vanish felt like watching the sun break through after too many gray days. And in that moment, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about Karen. This was about us, the people who'd allowed her to rule for so long. We'd let fear keep us quiet, let her voice fill the air until ours felt too small. But silence isn't harmless. It feeds the bully. It tells them they're untouchable. The real victory wasn't the helicopter or the mayor's lawn. The real victory was that the silence had broken. That night, the cul-de-sac felt transformed. Parents lingered on porches, laughing in ways they hadn't in years. Teenagers sprawled across lawns, music spilling into the night without fear of a clipboard citation. Jenkins raised a glass to me from his porch, and I raised mine back. Later, as I sat with bourbon in hand, I thought about Karen. About her Lexus swaying in the air like a Christmas ornament, about her scream echoing beneath the roar of blades, about the board stripping her of power with a single vote. And I thought about how fragile power really is when it's built on intimidation instead of respect. She never apologized, never admitted she was wrong. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe bullies never do, but she left, and in leaving, she gave us something she never intended: freedom. The roses swayed gently in the evening breeze, their petals glowing under the streetlights. For years, those flowers had been the excuse for war. Now they stood as quiet proof that beauty doesn't need permission to exist. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the peace wash over me. Maplerist was free. Not perfect, not immune to future storms, but free of the queen who'd mistaken fear for loyalty. And as the night deepened, one truth settled in my chest like a stone. Sometimes the loudest justice isn't in a courtroom or a council chamber. Sometimes it's in a helicopter, a lawn, and a neighborhood learning it has a voice after all. The morning after Karen was gone, Maplerist felt almost unrecognizable. Not because the houses had changed, or the lawns, or even the roses she'd once declared illegal. It was the air itself. For the first time in years, it was light, clean, unburdened. The neighborhood that had bent under her clipboard finally stood tall. I walked down my driveway, coffee in hand, and paused. No Lexus blocking my garage. No notes tucked under my windshield, just silence. But not the heavy silence she used to enforce, the kind where everyone held their breath, afraid to move wrong. This was different. This silence was alive, full of possibility. Neighbors waved freely now. Parents chatted across fences without glancing over their shoulders. Kids played tag in the street, their laughter carrying farther than it had in years. Even Jenkins shuffled past with a spring in his step, his cane tapping like a drumbeat of freedom. He tipped his cap and said, "Feels like spring finally came, doesn't it?" And it did. Karen had tried to build a kingdom on fear, but fear is fragile. The second you shine a light on it, it scatters like shadows at dawn. That helicopter didn't just lift a Lexus, it lifted the weight she'd pressed on all of us. But here's the truth I've been turning over ever since. Bullies don't rise because they're strong. They rise because the rest of us stay silent. We tell ourselves it's easier not to fight, easier to trim the hedges to regulation height, easier to pay the fine and move on, but silence isn't peace. Silence is surrender. And I won't pretend it was easy. Planning what I did, carrying it out, it was risky, messy, loud. But sometimes justice has to be loud. Sometimes dignity doesn't look like keeping your head down. Sometimes dignity looks like staring arrogance in the face and saying no more. That's the lesson Karen left behind, even if she never meant to. She thought she was untouchable. She thought fear made her invincible. But fear only works until someone stops being afraid. I sat on my porch that evening, bourbon in hand, watching the sun set over roses she once wanted gone. Their petals glowed like embers, stubborn and beautiful, refusing to bend to anyone's clipboard. And I thought about every neighbor who had once whispered in fear, now laughing out loud. I thought about how one absurd act, a helicopter, a lawn, a dangling Lexus, had broken years of silence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't quiet. Sometimes it's loud enough to shake an entire neighborhood awake. And maybe that's the point. Life will always have its Karens, its bullies, its self-appointed rulers with clipboards and smirks. But life will also give us choices. Choices to stay quiet or to speak. To bend or to stand. To surrender or to fight back with creativity, courage, and maybe even a little humor. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Don't let small tyrants dictate the quality of your life. Your voice matters more than their clipboard. Your dignity is worth more than their threats. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remind them, remind everyone that you cannot be silenced. Tell me what's the worst HOA or neighborhood story you've ever seen? Drop it in the comments below. And if this tale lit a spark in you, hit subscribe. Because trust me, there are plenty more HOA battles to come. And who knows, the next story might just be yours. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.